Because dealing with the legislature is, someone mentioned objective criteria. That's not what the legislature does. Anecdotal information is what drives legislation. Tom was particularly, he had a style of the legislature, unlike most secretaries, in that he told them exactly what the objective criteria was. And that led to, some interesting interactions. But it was a consistent, ethical presentation all the time. He did the same, I think, with the people that interacted with the department, with the local governments, with private developers, and with the media. I think when the media interacted with Tom, they knew they were going to get a consistent, clear description of what was happening, and that they could go to print with. But most importantly, he represented to the people of Florida a strong ethical understanding and demonstration of acting on the best interests of the people of Florida and the natural resources of Florida. And because of that, I think he was one of the best secretaries, and for sure, he was the last real secretary of the Department of Community Affairs, Tom Pelham.
Good afternoon. Thank you, Jim, for the very nice introduction, and thank you for your decades of ethical public service. I want to congratulate the organizers for putting on an outstanding program today. I don't know that there's a lot left for me to say, but I'm very glad that I was invited. It's a wonderful program that you've done, and I'm delighted to be participating in the 7th annual ethics seminar. One note of clarification: the subject of my presentation is tweaking, not twerking. I'm told that that's what Miley Cyrus did in her recent concert. I have, though, witnessed some conduct over the years that would fit in well with her stage performance. Jim mentioned the legislature. I was going to get to that a little later, but since he brought it up, let me just start off by addressing the legislature. When I agreed to become the secretary for the second time, I thought, well, I'm well prepared to do this. I've done it before. I know all about the multiple constituencies that the department has to please: developers, cities, counties, environmental groups, other public organizations, citizen groups. I didn't think a lot about the legislature. And the reason I think is because during my first term, 20 years earlier, the legislature was far different than it turned out to be during my second term. In fact, I can recall very few things about relations with individual legislators, who in general were very supportive, respectful, eager to work with the department to implement the then new Growth Management Act. What I found though the second time around was something completely different. A completely different approach by legislators who were very aggressive in lobbying and pressuring state agencies to accommodate special interests, in particular development and business interests. So, after having sat down with one of the committee chairs who had jurisdiction over the Department of Community Affairs, and agreeing that we have a growth management bill that included things only that the department and its secretary would sign off on, I was called one day over to that legislator's office to discuss our bill, which had been drawn up and drafted and I had reviewed. When I walked into his office, I found the legislator and probably the leading top long-time lobbyist for the development interest, which took me a little bit by surprise. the legislature took out a sheet of paper and handed it to me, and it contained a lobbyist request for 20 additions to our Growth Management Act. I reviewed the list and respectfully informed the legislature that there's no way the department could support most of these things. And he says, well, Mr. Secretary, I ask that you take this back with you, give careful thought to it, and see if you can accommodate the lobbyist, who, by the way, is the one in the room I have the most respect for. Well, I went back to my office. Staff reviewed the list of proposals, most of which were simply outrageous, very one-sided, special interest-oriented proposals. And I explained again to the legislature why the department simply could not support most of those things. I need them. Well, I understand, but we can't support them. I have constituents who want these things. I understand, but there's no way that the department can support most of these things. I am a senator and you're not. I said, I understand. I understand that you have to do what you have to do, but respectfully, the department cannot support most of these items. This meeting is over. That sort of set the tone for the legislature in my second term. I could give you a list of situations created by overzealous legislators attempting to influence the department on behalf of one of their constituents or special interest lobbyists. Very difficult to deal with those situations. After all, these people, you know, have control over your budget and your legislation. And at that time, the department was undergoing a sunset review, which meant that it had to be reauthorized by the legislature or it would die. So we had to be especially careful about how we dealt with members of the legislature. Great delicacy, decorum, respect, the whole ball of wax. Most people don't realize that in 2010, the Senate passed a bill reauthorizing the Department of Community Affairs by a 38-0 vote. We have worked very, very hard in the legislature to get the department reauthorized, and that came out of the Senate. On the House side, 3 different House committees took up the issue, and each of those committees voted to reauthorize the department. But the then Speaker of the House would not allow that bill to come to a vote on the floor, because if he had, it would have passed, and a part of his agenda was to, frankly, dismantle or abolish the department. So this legislative angle threw a completely different wrench into what is always a delicate and a difficult process anyway. I haven't heard the legislature mentioned a lot today, but what the state legislature does affects all of us. It affects all local governments around the state. And we should, I think, give more consideration to what's going on up there. What happened in 2011 with the abolishment of the Department of Community Affairs and the gutting of the state's growth management and planning laws, I think probably if you applied ordinary ethical standards and values that we cherish in our democratic, with a little d, society, we would come to the conclusion that what happened there violated virtually every one of them. Because it was a closed door, not inclusive, a very unfair, one-sided process that allowed basically one industry to dictate what was going to be in the bill. And so that's what we have today. I just wanted to get the legislative thing out of the way before I move on. The temptations for unethical conduct today are huge. There is the corrosive impact of money, the influence of special interest lobbyists who raise untold millions of dollars for contributions and in return make millions of dollars. Based on reporting requirements, the 2 top lobbying firms in Florida during the last year